he represents this American phenomenon. I think you could, if I could stereotype or generalize, of second generation people who come here for a better life from, to be frank, not enviable places, and they're and they go in. They're not business people, and they're not entrepreneurs, but they're academics or media people, and they're children, and they're very critical of the very country they sought refuge.
Hello and welcome back to the Americano Show. Today I am delighted to be joined by one of our favourite guests, Victor Davis Hanson, who is a classicist and scholar and the author of The End of Everything, which is coming out in paperback in the United Kingdom in October. And I thoroughly recommend the book. We've actually done a podcast discussing it before, and you can look that up if you want to. Victor, I thought we'd start by talking about a story that's really been causing quite a lot of interest on this side of the Atlantic and a lot more in America. And that's the primary election victory of Zohran Mamdani, which seems to a lot of Brits to be a very un-American story, because socialists tend not to win important democratic election victories.
Yeah, there's so many exegesis here in the United States to explain this, as you say, this apparent aberration. One of it is the ranked voting system. It's kind of a Byzantine process where people give multiple votes. It takes a long time to count them, and it favors non-traditional candidates that are better organized. I think out of the 5.5 million New Yorkers, he got about 400,000 votes. And so the question people are asking in the runoff, which will probably, unfortunately for the conservative side, there will be Eric Adams, maybe Cuomo will put another attempt in, and then you'll have Curtis Sliwa, but they may divide the vote. But people have offered all sorts of explanations for the inexplicable. Part of it is a referendum on the Democratic Party that has had no agenda. They don't no winning agenda in the last few years. The Biden administration left very unpopular under kind of controversy about his mental state. And then we had what they call here in the United States 20-80 issues, 70-30. They were on the wrong side of the border: crime, foreign policy, energy. And they don't control the Congress, the White House, or the Supreme Court. So there was a sense of frustration, especially among younger people, that might explain it. Whether he's going to win the general, it depends on how alarming he is to people in New York. One of the phenomena, I think everybody, because he has an anti-Semitic record, to be candid, and that is the largest Jewish city in the world, but it's down to about 15% Jewish now. And even the word Jewish in New York is a misnomer, because we're into the fourth generation of the Jewish diaspora. And many of the people who supported him were what we call secular Jews, liberal, mostly white, affluent, professional classes. And he didn't do well in the constituency that's important for the Democrats in the long run in the midterm elections. That's Hispanics and blacks. Finally, he represents this American phenomenon. I think you could, if I could stereotype or generalize, of second generation people who come here for a better life from, to be frank, not enviable places, and they're and they go in. They're not business people, and they're not entrepreneurs, but they're academics or media people, and they're children, and they're very critical of the very country they sought refuge. So he's in the same tradition of Barack Obama and Barack Obama's father. His father was a Maltese. In the case of Pete Buttigieg, his father was a Maltese leftist. AOC's father came from the Caribbean, was a leftist. So you have Buttigieg, Obama. Kamala Harris's father was a leftist professor. I used to see him walking around campus, Stanford. And the same thing is true of Mamdani. His father is a leftist who was, ironically, you could call him a settler colonialist. I mean, he was a beneficiary of the British presence in Africa, and he was one of the 1% as far as income goes in Uganda, I think. And the other thing is, very quickly, he's very incoherent. So he thinks these plans are new, but we've experimented with them in university communities. Where I worked, that I went to Stanford, there was always I guess you would call it a socialist co-op store that was supposed to give food cheaper to everybody, and it folded. We've had rent control; it doesn't work. So this is not new what he's doing. He said the most controversial thing he said, besides billionaires should not exist, and he's the beneficiary indirectly of the Soros PAC money for voter turnout. But he said he was going to address or focus on more affluent and white areas of New York, which is kind of odd because if you look at per capita income in the United States by ethnic affiliation and race, so-called whites are number 17 in per capita income, about 59,000, excuse me. The highest level of the first 5 categories of highest level per capita income are all Asian immigrants. And the highest of all are people who identify as Indian. So if he was intellectually honest, he would say, I'm going to concentrate on Indian neighborhoods because they're the wealthiest and most privileged in the United States as far as income goes. But so it's kind of incoherent what he's saying. And it's part of the problem is the Jewish population has fled. They've lost about 2 million people over the last 40 years to Florida and places like that. So it's not a Jewish city as it was once known.
Mm. You mentioned his father being an academic, a kind of radical academic, but he's also a product himself of higher education. We had a very interesting piece by Peter Wood of the National Association of Scholars on the Spectator website called The Education of Zohran Mamdani. And that looked at his time at Bodine, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Bodine, yes.
Bodine College.
It's one of the more exclusive, but also it's got a reputation for being one of the most leftist of all private universities.
Yes,
American Association of Scholars did a whole expose on it maybe 10 or 12 years ago.
Yes.
And they were shocked how left-wing it was.
And in that expose, they looked at all the different, radically progressive courses you could do, a lot of African studies, a lot of post-colonial rhetoric, post-colonial language. And he seems to have imbibed that, has he not?
He has, and yet, again, as true of so many university academics that go into colonial studies, he went to a private exclusive school. He must have believed in the meritocratic system, which he now denounces because he competitively placed into one of the most exclusive public schools, equivalent to a private school in New York, that very few people, 1%, get into. His mother has been very successful as a filmmaker. His father was given every opportunity of fellowships as a student and DEI consideration, and he's a prominent Middle East scholar. So he's a child of privilege. He's never really found himself employment or career-wise. He was a rapper for a while. He was an activist for a while. He ran for local office for a while. And all that can be said about him is that he is as charismatic or as outgoing or as sociable, say, as Barack Obama. And I think people in that subset of the electorate, the left-wing base, the urban base, the metrosexual base, the single professional urbanite, they all still dream of that type of joy or excitement about an Obama-like character without really worrying about his actual positions or his actual personal hypocrisies and paradoxes and contradictions.
Well, they also tend to elevate people very quickly in the hope that they are a new Obama figure. I mean, that was certainly the case with Kamala Harris, who was called the female Obama and so on. But Obama, for all his flaws, was a very brilliant speaker. He could deliver an address beautifully. I don't think the same could be said of Kamala Harris. And so far, I don't see any evidence of that with Mamdani. I mean, I've seen quite a lot of social media clips where he seems winning and charismatic, and he has given some quite slick interview answers. But I haven't seen any real evidence of him being a great orator.
No, he's good in repartee, personal interviews, video clips, as you said. That's part of his campaign. I think part of it is that he does not want to give a 20, 30, 40-minute comprehensive speech because he gets into all of these past things that he's said and advocated. And he's advocated socialism, he's advocated free transit, he's advocated basically non-profit grocery stores in New York, open to the people. He's talked about in racial terms, even more than class terms. And these statements in the past haunt him because he's such a contradiction. He's such a hypocrite, because he is one of the 1% in the United States, and he's one of the beneficiaries of capitalism. He's one of the beneficiaries of a kind and welcoming the United States that looks toward favorably people like that, who parents were talented, they wanted to come to the United States, they were fast-tracked with green cards, they got citizenship, they were given scholarships, they didn't have to pay for their education. They found that being Indian in a 68% white country was an advantage, not a disadvantage under the DEI. So I think that's why he does not give speeches. He does not outline positions, because it's neo-socialist, if not communist or Marxist, and he's got a whole corpus of past statements that he's always trying to contextualize now. And he can't, when he says globalize the intifada, and he says he's not going to retract it, and he says it doesn't mean what it means. And almost 90% of the people who say that are talking about bringing the war all over the world, and that means demonizing what we saw in Britain the other day with the rock stars that were talking about kill the IDF and all of that stuff. That's what it is. It's spreading the hatred of Israel, and by association perhaps Jews, all over the world. And that's what his father does. That's what people at Columbia University do, and he does. But it doesn't sound well to most people, so he's going to keep that quiet. And yet he can't renounce it because he's being backed by AOC, the Squad, Al Sharpton, the whole cast of characters we associate with lunatic New Yorkers.
Well, the globalize the intifada movement does seem to have quite a lot of energy and votes, especially in European capitals. You see it where you do have substantial Muslim populations, and there is a fairly substantial Muslim population in New York. But as you say, it's usually been offset democratically by a large Jewish vote, which has diminished but is still large. I wonder if the real appeal here is what you touched on before, which is the privilege element, and that you have, when he talks a lot about property and rent controls and so on, socialist ideas about property, and that appeals to quite a lot of people who are privileged, perhaps not as privileged as he was, but who cannot afford the life that they would expect to have in New York because New York has become so expensive.
I think that's true. The data, the demographic of his support seems tripartite. He's got a group of very, very wealthy people who really don't care who's in charge of New York because they have enough ample resources that for them it's a boutique feeling, or it's an abstraction, or it's a utopian urge, and they don't care what high. And then he's got the subsidized poor that he gives all these promises of free things to. And then the third subset, as you say, is the metrosexual, upward mobile, highly educated, what we disparage or stereotype as cat ladies or Bernie bros or whatever they are. And they feel that their education and their self-described awareness and sophistication should warrant higher salaries than they get. And they look at New York and they really can't get the type of things that the wealthy, the really ultra wealthy have, and they feel they deserve it because of their moral superiority and their education, and they can't do it, and not in New York. And so he appeals to those three groups. Whom he does not appeal to are the working classes, the white working class and the minority working classes, because they don't like him because they feel he's privileged and one of the 1%, and he's a hypocrite. And they do not like him because many of the people are immigrants from places that were disasters, that had tried socialism, and people, they're not as radical as he thinks. The thing that I guess the great subtext of his candidacy is how, if he were to be elected, and I would say it's 50-50 now, were all these threats that 1 million people or $1 trillion would leave New York for Miami, Palm Beach, these areas, are they going to be reified or not? Or is New York iconic enough that lived through Bill de Blasio and David Dinkins and all these disastrous mayors? There was always a Giuliani or Bloomberg at the end of the tunnel that could come in and save and is that city still resilient enough? And I'm not sure it is.
Well, in a strange way, like Trump, I'm not comparing his political phenomenon to Trump's, but in a strange way, like Trump, he does seem to be blessed with bad opponents. I mean, Cuomo had considerable flaws as a candidate.
Yes, he did.
And Eric Adams, who will try and stop him now, the existing mayor, is very unpopular for any number of reasons. So he does seem to be blessed by bad opponents.
Yes, and people have pointed out, people on the right have written and published essays that saying they cannot vote for Cuomo because he killed off the elderly in rest homes by putting COVID patients in, or the sexual harassment, or they didn't like his obnoxious brash style. They didn't like his brother's Chris Cuomo. And then on Eric Adams, I think before the election cycle appeared, was polling about 8 to 10%. People were very angry at him, and he has flipped because the Biden administration went after him when he cracked down on illegal immigration, and then the Trump administration threw a life raft to him by they inherited that indictment and decided not to pursue it, that he was trafficking with Turkish money and campaign irregularities. So he's a flawed candidate too. And Curtis Silva's sort of a perennial presidential candidate. He just always runs in New York, and he gets about 5% of the vote. And they don't like each other. They're very different people. The chances they would unite around one, I think, are very small. So you're absolutely right. His chances are, it's analogous to Donald Trump. If Donald Trump had run against a Bill Clinton type of candidate, he would have had a lot more trouble than running against Joe Biden - Kamala Harris. So it's the same thing.
And presumably nationally, this New York election, which will get a lot of attention, is good news for the Trump movement, for the Republican Party at large, because it shows up the Democratic Party in a light that large chunks of America will find disturbing.
Yeah, I think there's some data-driven evidence that that's the correct supposition. When people look back at the 2024 election, and it's almost 50% of Hispanics defected to Trump, about 27% of black males. I think overall it was 16% of blacks. These were astounding numbers. And when people were polled, and the white working class held firm, maybe it went up 1%. They didn't say they voted for Trump because Kamala Harris wasn't left enough. They said just the opposite, that they didn't trust her because she had flipped on deportations. She was against deportations, then she said she was for them. She said she wanted an open border when she was a senator. Basically, now she said she was a border hawk and wanted the wall, which she had damned. Same thing on fracking, same thing on defund the police. So they saw that she was a leftist that was trying to quickly change her political spots. And given that, you would think the Democratic Party would adjust, because their problem is not, it's kind of like 1972 when Humphrey lost by 100,000 votes to Nixon, and all the polling showed that he was a little bit too liberal in 68. In 72, Nixon was popular. He'd gone to China. The Democratic Party was told again and again, you've got to move to the middle. And yet they nominated George McGovern, and he doubled down more so than Humphrey, and lost in I think it's the fourth largest landslide in American presidential history. So they still don't get that message, and they are It's kind of like the Bernie bro phenomenon of 2016. And in 2020, the Democratic Party, as you remember, stepped in and they said Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie, they're going to destroy the party. And Biden hasn't won anything. He lost Iowa, he lost New Hampshire, he lost the Nevada caucuses. He was going to lose South Carolina. And then Jim Clyburn stepped in and they all disappeared. The Democratic Party basically coronated Joe Biden, a Faustian bargain. Basically, you serve as a wax and effigy, and we can put through your facsimile, we can put a very radical agenda through. But the point is that they were able, the donor class, both to create Joe Biden as an antithesis to the left-wing trend, and then to remove him when he was no longer useful. And then to tell Kamala Harris, you're to run as a Bill Clinton moderate. Try to do that. But I don't think they have that power anymore because of the humiliation of 2024, the defection in the electorate. I just don't see the donor class or the Chuck Schumers or the Pelosi's or any of that ossified hierarchy stepping in. And in fact, some of them, as you know, have endorsed him. They're starting to. Hakeem Jeffries is on the fence, but I think they feel that they've lost control of the party and they have no choice but to endorse him and then consult with him and try to advise him not to say things that will lose the party seats, say, in the midterms.
Well, and there are a lot of people who probably would have been Democrats not so long ago who are just in complete despair at the lack of what they see as a good opposition to Donald Trump. And they may be right. There are areas where a good opposition party could oppose or resist Donald Trump's agenda, but is failing to because the Democrats seem to be in such a terrible state. And that, of course, makes me think about Elon Musk, who is now talking about an America party following his fallout with Donald Trump, and in particular his objections to the big beautiful bill that seems to be going ahead now. Do you think there's a credible chance of a third party emerging in America? We've said it a lot of times before.
I mean, there never has been. We've had there were only two third party efforts. I mean, Eugene Debs and the socialists and all that didn't do well, but there were two serious third parties, but they were kind of unique. And one of them was Teddy Roosevelt and the Bull Moose Party of 1912, where they came in second. They beat the incumbent president, William Howard Taft, but they split the vote and elected Woodrow Wilson, which is informative and instructive because that's exactly what Ross Perot did in 92 and 96. He took 19% of the vote and ensured that George H.W. Bush wouldn't be reelected. And then in 1996, he took 9%, even though he withdrew and came back. And it was kind of a botched campaign, but he allowed Bill Clinton to win with 49% of the vote reelection. And so I think Elon Musk knows that. And he knows that he's not Teddy Roosevelt, but he could play a Ross Perot and leverage. And that's what he's been talking about. He's been talking about primarying Republicans. But if you read what he said, it's a little incoherent because Donald Trump in this second term has been transactional. And by that I mean he's more of a realist. He's not a neo-isolationist at all. He's a Jacksonian. He will take a dramatic, risky step like bombing Iran, but then he'll just shock everybody by offering a olive branch to the extent that he won't even reply when they have that performance art sort of scripted attack on our base in Qatar. Or he'll talk about he stopped all illegal immigration, but he's all talking about doing something with the dreamers. So he's very hard to predict. And what Elon Musk is talking about is appealing to the MAGA base on fiscal responsibility. I mean, when he says he's going to help Thomas Massey is an ostracized ultra MAGA. And yet, even when he does that, the people who hate him most are people like Steve Bannon, who have said that he should be deported.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to see where that constituency is. Is it disaffected MAGA people that are angry about too much spending? Yes, but those same people don't like globalists or people like Elon Musk that are billionaires. And so I think it's, to be reductionist, I think it's really out of a spite. And I'm a person who really admires Elon Musk, what he's done and contributed to American society. But I think it's just picked that he did all of that work with Doge and he brought all of those people in. And two things happened. He promised $1 trillion. And then when he butted up against the administrative bureaucratic state, he realized that he's going to be demonized for cutting 200 billion at most. And then second, he feels that even 200 billion was historic, but it was wiped away by the indiscriminate spending in the big beautiful bill, and he was not appreciated. So then he left, and then he feels, and he said this many times, I really took a hit. I spent 330 million of my own money. My stock went down in Tesla. I went from being the darling of the left to public enemy number one. And what did I get for it? They didn't even do their part and control spending when I was doing my part to try to cut. So I think he's very angry, but as many geniuses are, he's not a sober, judicious, stable personality. So when you lash out at Donald Trump, and there's been a lot of people who have, the Cheneys are one, Steve Bannon was one. No one wins in that. He's won. He's got so much. I don't want to say he's shameless, but he doesn't care. He'll get down in the ring with anybody because he's been in a ring before, Trump. And anybody who wants to go mano a mano with Donald Trump and personal insults or they don't win. And we saw the first round where he apologized and tried to call Trump, and Trump's not taking his calls. So I think this third party talk is personal. It's understandable. He wasn't treated right. He's angry, but if he's not going to win the second round.
But Musk does make some fair points, does he not?
He does make very good points
about
Absolutely.
Fiscal restraint and what's the point in a debt ceiling if we keep raising it? It's not insane talk, and it's where the Tea Party came from, really. That kind of thinking.
It is, and Trump got himself into a bind because he did three things on the campaign. He promised massive the continuation of the tax cuts. He promised no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on first responders. And then he said he was going to cut $1 trillion to reduce the to almost $1.92 trillion deficit. But he found out very quickly that the MAGA agenda is different than doctrinaire Bush republicanism, capital gains tax, cut social, privatize. So you can't do that with a MAGA base. So when you start talking about cutting Medicaid or reforming social, you get into the lower working classes that are your base of support, and they don't like that. So they didn't make the cuts that he wanted, yet he cut revenue, and then so the fallback position may or may not be true. Suddenly it was, we're not going to get 2% GDP growth. We're going to get 4 or maybe 5 because of all these incentives we have in this bill. If we get 1 million self-deported illegal aliens, that's going to save billions of dollars on social support. We've got 10 trillion in foreign investment. These tax cuts and deregulation and energy development. We've got the energy the energy secretary saying that we have $100 trillion worth of energy that's been on tap. So what I'm getting is it's kind of gimmicky. They're saying we don't really care if it balances out now and we're going to take a hit in 1 year, but because we've deported these people, we're cutting the budget, we cut this, but more importantly, they come up with these equations. For every $1 billion in foreign investment, you get 5,000 jobs. We've got 11 trillion. We're going to get 30 million jobs. We're going to have the golden passport. There's 20 million people in Europe that might leave, and we're going to charge them 5 million each to get fast track citizen. They're coming up with all these things on the revenue side. It's kind of Arthur Laffer on steroids, but it's a little different because it's everywhere. We're going to do this with energy. We're going to do this with immigration. We're going to do this with deregulation. We're going to do this with tax cuts, and it's going to so grow the economy up to 4 or 6. And they keep quoting Reagan, and Reagan in 84 was still behind in January of 84, Walter Mondale in the polls because we were in that terrible recession. And then I think from March until September, the economy grew at an annual rate of 7%, and just demolished Mondale. And they said, this is going to happen again, and we're going to get so much revenue, but this time we're going to start cutting. And that's what bothers, I guess, Musk. He's saying these are all hypotheticals, and it's never really worked unless you control spending.
Well, one area of revenue that the Trump administration and Trump himself are very keen to talk about is the external revenue service of tariffs.
Yes.
And the numbers that are coming in are quite striking. And that would appear to fly in the face of what every economist warned us about, which is that tariffs are inevitably a disaster. Do you think that's more magic thinking from Team Trump to say that these numbers are just good in and of themselves?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because if you read the Wall Street Journal in the month of March and April and all the way until May, they were saying because of the trade wars and all of these tariff questions that we were headed for a recession. The stock market would be down all year, that personal income would be down, inflation is going to rise, we're going to have lower GDP, higher, and all that didn't happen. And the latest statistics show that personal income's up, personal savings is up, inflation is static, job growth is good, GDP may be a little flat, but it could be good. Stock market's at a record high. And then when you get to the revenues, we were told by our blue chip economists that there was no way you would get more than $100 billion a year and maybe $1 trillion in 10 years in revenue. And Trump was talking in fantastic terms of $200 billion a month. And actually, if you look at the last 3 months, as you say, it's gone from 40 to I think 70 or 80, and then now it's approaching up to $100 billion or more in revenue. And so the only question is, and I guess the economists where I work at Hoover, I'm not an economist, but I listen to them, there's some magic number, and they don't know where it is, that the Europeans and the Japanese and the South Koreans and China that were running up these big surpluses were making comfortable profit margins. And even though there's tariffs on them, we don't know what they're comfortable with. And by paying the tariff to the United States and getting a reduced profit margin as a price of staying in this lucrative market. And the evidence now shows that they're willing to hold prices steady and not spike inflation, because they were doing pretty well, and they figure that if they can do a 10 or 15% tariff, they can live with it and still make a profit.
Yeah.
And so the question is, I guess, for Trump, if he starts getting this tariff in, he's got a problem. Will there be people in the administration that tempt him to even raise them higher, and that would be disastrous. But what do you do with countries when you, like Britain and Australia, that were actually running deficits with the United States, and are willing to go down to 0.0, or what are going to symmetric tariffs? That's, I think, the problem. That he said that we're being ripped off. We need symmetrical or no tariffs. Peter Navarro said that. And then we have certain countries that are saying, fine, Israel said it, we will have no tariffs, or whatever you want as a tariff, we'll do. And yet when they say that, that doesn't fit in with a paradigm that they're going to get a lot of revenue from tariffs. So if people call the Trump administration's bluff and saying, yes, we had asymmetrical tariffs, yes, this, but we can live with no tariffs, because actually some of us were running a deficit with you. Not a lot, and I think that's going to be a problem too. That's where he gets into trouble with the MAGA base and people, when they hear that he wants to put a tariff on Australia just because of beef, even though Australia is running a deficit. I think Britain is running a deficit with us too. And they're supposedly our closest allies. So it's a very thorny question, but the more tariff money that comes in unexpectedly in March, April, May, the more the temptation is to see that as a cash cow and either continue it against countries that want to lower their tariffs, or raise the tariffs to get even more. And that's going to be a problem, I think.
And I suppose the big political risk for Trump or for the Republican Party after Trump is that having promised this golden age, all this revenue and growth that will inevitably come from the policies, if they don't deliver it in this age of anti-politics, anti-incumbency, the fall away might be pretty spectacular. And you do have a lot of young people who seem to be attracted to quite radical left-wing thinking. Things could, I mean, a lot of people have always said what Donald Trump will eventually bring us is a left-wing American government. And that warning might not be completely wrong.
I think a lot of it depends on some things he can't control. I think it's true, it's very strange now to watch CNN of all places, and once in a while on MSNBC, and see people say this was the best 2 weeks of a presidency in a long time because of the Iran bombing, the increased NATO expenditures, the good economic news on the stock market, on job creation, foreign investment, inflation. He's winning, and maybe if he gets the bill, just like the fact that he got a bill through, whatever's in it, that he's doing very well. But there's a certain, if he were to able, I mean, we're paying $3 billion a day in interest. That's $1 trillion. And if he was able to get a 1%, 1.5% over the year reduction in the Fed, he could save $1 billion. He could save almost $900 billion a year. That would make a big difference. But more importantly, the housing market is the one area that's flat. And if he could lower those mortgage rates by 2%, it would really help. So I think that explains why he's taking these extraordinary attacks on the head of the Fed. And a lot of people who resent what he's doing will privately tell you that there's no evidence that Powell, given the situation we're in, that should not reduce interest rates. There is not a danger right now of inflation. There's a lot of good indicators. So it can go either way, but he is very, very sensitive about the question that you just asked, that he's got to deliver not just statistics, but real things that people can feel. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of amazing that the Iranian bombing, that everybody said, I went back today and looked at what was being said on Breitbart, on where I write American Greatness, on the Federalist, and there, my gosh, they were talking about permanent splits in the MAGA coalition. Tucker was saying 30,000 dead, World War III. Candace Owens was saying she regretted voting for him. Steve Bannon said he was beside himself. And yet that kind of dissipated because no one ever thought he was going to have a 25-minute incursion. Nobody was lost. You never have a war where nobody's lost, and you probably killed very few people. And then as soon as he did it, he shocked everybody and said he wanted a ceasefire, and then they thought that would be impossible, and he got it. And so I think they don't have anywhere to go, is what I'm trying to struggle to say. When they look at the political landscape, it's not like there's a Bill Clinton out there, a centrist Democrat. There's no alternative. And I don't think the third party avenue. So I think they'll stick with him unless we get into a serious recession.
Yes.
I don't see that happening, though.
Or a serious war, but as you suggest.
I think you're safer, actually, with a deterrent, vigilant presidency. When he left, I mean, this is kind of old hat now, but it is true that his 4 years in first term were the only one of the 3 presidencies before and after him, the Bush, Obama, Biden, in which Vladimir Putin did not leave his borders. And it was Anthony Blinken, after all, who said in the third year that the Middle East was the calmest portfolio he had. And the subtext was he inherited that because of the sanctions and and then Biden, I think you could argue, by his laxity and his empty braggadocio, accelerated what happened in the Middle East and Ukraine. But I think Trump was on the right idea that if you're deterrent and you can find methods of retaliation against Soleimani or Baghdadi or the Wagner Group, and you can limit that action and it's justified and there's an out, and you don't put ground troops or any troops in a disadvantageous situation, then you're going to have less chance of a war. You've reestablished deterrence. I think that's what he's thinking. And as soon as he went into Iraq, he was already thinking about, I'm going to lower the sanctions on Syria or get rid of them, and we're going to flip that to what it should have been all along. It's a 75% Arab Sunni country. It's not 13. We had an Alawite that represented 13% of the population, was very unpopular, was pro-Iranian. If he flips that, and I think he has, it's going to, and maybe Lebanon because of the attrition of Hezbollah and what's happened to Iran, it's quite remarkable that you could have a period of more stability, not less, in the Middle East, especially if you get the Gulf states on. And if he can cut some kind of deal in Ukraine, Ukraine's a little harder because to negotiate what he said, I'll end the war in the first day and all that stuff. But for him to negotiate with Putin, there has to be a period where he either maintains support for Ukraine or increases it as a deterrent to Putin. And if he doesn't do that, then he's not going to have any leverage over Putin. And not yet, if he does that, it's going to alienate some of the people on Fox News, the Tucker segment of the MAGA group. So that's going to be difficult because he's going to have to make a really tough decision and say, if I want to end this war for 3 or 6 months, I've got to help Ukraine somehow get some leverage against Putin. And so I can convince Putin he can't go to Kiev. And yet that's contrary to MAGA isolationism.
Well, he's upset them once. I imagine he could be willing to upset them again.
When I wrote this book about him, and I'm finishing a sequel to it, his comeback, it's amazing how transparent he is. If you read some of those ghostwritten books, The Art of the Deal, The Art of the Comeback, he's almost operating on spec. You go into a negotiation and you act crazy, you say things, and you demand 75% advantage of the particular contention. And then you scream and yell, and people don't like you, and then you sigh and you kind of grab your forehead as you go down from 75 to 60, and then you hit a magical point of advantage that's tolerable to both sides, 55% in your favor. And then the key is you'd never tell anybody you took the person, because you might do business with him again. And he outlines this, but you praise him to the skies. You praise Kim Jong-un. He said, God bless her. He said, God bless America, God bless even Iran. And he said, I don't know why they want to kill me. I didn't kill him. I don't want to kill Khomeini. And same thing with Putin. And people misinterpret that. Oh my gosh, he loves dictators. He doesn't love dictators. It's just transactional. Yes. That's how he does business. And then he tells privately his people, don't make fun of Iran and don't say that they're weak. I can do that if they attack me, but we got to deal with them, and we took them to the cleaners, and let's keep it that way. And that's how he does it.
Yes, it is paradoxical though often, isn't it? Because, for instance, while praising how tough the Iranians are, tough negotiators and so on, he also mocked the attack on the American base in Qatar, because he said, they had to save face, and he put save face in quote marks. And if you're allowing them to save face while mocking the sort of superficiality of their face saving, that's it's a strange position to put yourself in.
Yeah, I think his attitude is the more unpredictable, fluid, volatile, rambunctious I am, that bothers my friends and allies, bothers my enemies more.
Yeah.
I was speaking at the Hoover Institution to some European diplomats that were military attachés last week, and it was very interesting. There were about 50 of them, and I guess if I would sum up their attitude, it was kind of like, we've been had. We hate this person, and yet when we look at Obama and Biden, and we look at NATO now, he was the one that was going to destroy it. He was going to destroy NATO. You remember that, Mr. Hanson? He was going to destroy NATO, and now we find out that 23 of 32 nations have met the 2%, and they're even going to go up to 5%. and they spent another $400 billion on defense, which was timely with Ukraine. And we don't like how he made us do that. But now in retrospect, we're calling him daddy because we feel that not only with tough NATO partners, like getting Sweden with its military complex and Finland with its artillery, and Polish army is going to be huge, and Germany is promising the biggest army in Europe. Would that have happened with people we like rather than people we detest? And that was kind of, it's kind of like castor oil. He's giving them a medicine that makes them, or a chemotherapy. It makes you sick, but in the long run, it was something you might not have done unless you were an extremist, I guess.
I'm sure that's true, although often when people talk about German rearmament, alarm bells ring.
Well, you're speaking to somebody whose father, uncle, everybody in my family either fought in the European or Pacific theater, and my father said one thing before. He said, "You're not going to buy a German or Japanese car as long as I'm alive."
Oh, really? Well.
And when he died, I bought a Toyota.
Well, Donald Trump feels the same way about German and Japanese cars.
Yeah, but his was based on World War II.
Victor Davis Hanson, thank you very much for coming on to Americano again. It's always a great pleasure and an honor to speak to you.
Same here, Freddie. Thank you again.